Welcome to Writing Faster PHP with HHVM and Hack. So this is a little bit of a misnomer. This is not a PHP talk as such. It's about running PHP faster using HHVM or writing it in Hack to get more benefits with that. So let's get started. My name is, whoa, I forgot to plug my dongle in. Why is it not clicking? There's the port. There we go. All right. My name is Davey Shafik. I am a community engineer at EngineYard. EngineYard will take your PHP applications and scale them in the cloud. I'm the author of the Zend PHP 5 Certification Study Guide, Revision 3. That's the new cover, which I put in today, is coming out soon. PHP Master, PHP Anthology. Contributor to Zend Frameworks 1 and 2, PHP Docs, and PHP Internals. I have one patch in there which says I'm allowed to do it. Put it on the slide. I'm also the original creator of PHAR, or PHP Archive. So if you've used Composer, that's what that really means is that I wrote it in PHP and someone way smarter did it in C and it got into PHP. But my name is in PHP Info, and that's all I care about. I'm also the lead for PHP Women here in the United States, and I'm at dshafik on Twitter. PHP Women is doing, we're raising money to send people to conferences. So if you want an elephant, please come see me. I'm right next to the EngineYard booth, and we'll get that done. Another thing I like to mention is Prompt. This is a mental health and tech awareness initiative that EngineYard runs to just kind of raise the conversation around mental health. So one more thing, because I'm Steve Jobs. I am hard of hearing, as I mentioned. So if you have a question, I'm actually probably going to run out and listen to it. Everyone forgets this, so I've got the mic up here, and I'll run out. At this point, I like to tell people how I structure my slides, because I'm a little bit different from most people. There's two things that I hate about other speakers, and I've been told off for saying this. But number one is when you have a ton of bullet points up here and they act as subtitles, but it's like a Japanese movie where you're reading faster than I'm talking. And then the other one is when I hear about a really great talk, which I hope people are going to hear that about my talks, and I go look up the slides, and it's like 18 pictures of cats with random words, and there's just like no value to them. So what I do is I have a title slide like this, which I'm going to talk to, and right behind it I have bullet points that they'll be up there on the web, and I'll just skip past these, but these are my speaker notes, and you guys don't have to see them until you need them. So a brief history of HHVM, better known as HHVM. It started off as HPHPC, 2009 to 2012. Thankfully, it is dead. Basically, it was a cross-compiler. It would take PHP code, it would transpile it to C or C++, and then they would compile it. And with Facebook's code base, that would take about an hour and a half. So you can imagine that when you made a tiny change, waiting an hour and a half as a PHP developer to see if that change actually had any effect or the right effect, that's a ridiculous workflow. So they had to have this really weird, bizarre sort of half and half development environment, and it just wasn't workable. Doing releases was a nightmare. So HPHPC has finally been killed off. It was sort of open source in that they threw it onto GitHub and then forgot about it. It was only 5.2 based, PHP 5.2, except it didn't support things like eval or kind of any sort of really dynamic language features, because C doesn't support those. And basically, the main problem with it, though, is that it broke the developer workflow. And one of the primary goals of HHVM is to either complement your workflow by being identical to PHP, or to enhance it by adding things like Hack. So HHVM, HHVM, this is what's currently out there. It was released to the public in 2013, but they've been working on it since like 2011. It is an alternative runtime for PHP. So with PHP Stack, you have the compiler, which sends opcodes to the Zend VM, which runs the code that basically you've written. Facebook's HHVM slots in right there. So it takes their same PHP code, and it runs it in real time instead of transpiling it or transcoding it into something else. And it uses what's known as a JIT, which is a just-in-time compiler. And what that allows them to do is, with a little bit of analysis, take a look at your code and see what things it can compile for you on the fly and run those really, really fast, as opposed to just really fast. So HHVM is really, really awesome. By default, in its interpretive mode without the JIT, it's about twice as fast as current PHP. If you've seen any sort of talk around PHP 7, PHP NG, next gen, PHP 7, they did a huge amount of optimizations that are not backwards compatible in terms of the binary layer, so like all the extensions have to be written, but all your code will run just fine, right? So PHP 7 is also about twice as fast as current PHP, and they're kind of neck and neck in interpretive mode. It kind of depends what you're running and who's running the benchmarks, to be quite honest. If it's Zend, then obviously PHP 7 is faster. If it's Facebook, then very often they're faster. So one of the goals of HHVM is to match PHP bug for bug. So we know PHP is far from perfect. There's some behaviors in there that are really freaking weird, but that's the way it is, and they don't want to break backwards compatibility. So Facebook, instead of saying, well, we've got a perfect PHP now because we've written it from scratch and everything's planned out and we know what we're doing, we've got a language spec, which they worked on as well, rather than just like making a better PHP, they decided it was better for existing code to run and matched the bugs and the weird behavior as well. Right now, with version 3.3 that just came out, they are pretty much on parity with 5.6, so they're keeping parity. They are either on track or ahead of with a lot of the features, like they had generators first, for example, so they're doing a great job with making sure that modern PHP and new PHP stuff can run. Another thing that's come out of Facebook alongside HHVM and as part of HHVM is Hack, and it's sort of a new language. But it's not really, it's very familiar, and I kind of consider it a superset of PHP, or a syntactical fork. So the language features are the same, and a lot of the syntax is the same, but they've added in a bunch of new features on it in addition to that, things like typing and stuff that we'll get into. Actually, I have a whole list here of stuff that it adds. Type hinting generics, async functions, which are pretty cool, annotations, and a whole bunch more. It's also a language subset, and what I mean by that is it actually disallows a lot of bad practices. So goto is not supported in Hack. Variables are not supported in Hack. Globals are not supported in Hack. Top-level code, so like your entry point into your app, you can run it through Hack and HHVM, but you can't get strict mode Hack with top-level code. And you also can't mix HTML and PHP, or they have a better way of doing it. There's no closing tags in Hack, right? So one of the main goals is performance. Facebook, if they were to run, I hope I don't have a slide on this, if they were to run on vanilla PHP, they would need literally 3 times the data centers that they have. So there is a huge amount of cost savings and benefit to them in the performance side. And this is kind of what that looks like. So this is from Zend. There's a key up there that I can barely see. So we have multiple versions of HHVM, 3.1 and 3.2. Those are the red and purple bars. In general, you'll see they're kind of higher. PHP NG, so one on the end there. Those are sometimes faster, sometimes not. So take the benchmarks with a grain of salt, but the overall thing you should take from this is that either one of those is a huge amount faster than 5.4 with no optimizer or 5.5 even with Zend Opcache, okay? So performance is a huge win, and this is great for everybody. So who's using HHVM? Facebook, obviously, #2 website on the world. Baidu, which is #5 in the world and the #1 search engine in China. Wikimedia, which also includes Wikipedia, they just recently completed their transition to HHVM. And that basically means, as it says right here, and I know I said I hated subtitles, but 3 of the 4 top sites in the top 10 are now running HHVM, right? So if you're running high scale, HHVM is something you absolutely should be looking at. And Yahoo is the one of the in 4 that isn't. There's also something known as Repo Authoritative mode, which is very hard to say, but it's really simple. Basically, if you are pushing into production and you know your code isn't going to change until you tell it to, so you're not doing regular pushes, you're not in development, you're not doing anything like that, you can say, hey, this code is now static. It's not going to change for a while. Take a whole bunch of time to look at it, analyze it, and JIT it before we actually need to run it. Okay? And the JIT is just like insane fast. So Repo Authoritative mode says, I'm not going to be making any change to this. Please take your time and let's get it as fast as possible. So definitely take a look at it. But yeah. So how do we set up HHVM? It's a brand new interpreter, brand new runtime. It used to be kind of crazy, but they've pretty much standardized it. So this is an Nginx PHP FPM setup using FastCGI, of course, which is the FPM stuff, databases and whatnot. Basically, HHVM now supports FastCGI. And so it's a complete drop-in replacement, or you can actually use it alongside PHP if you're using Nginx. So you can just have it on a different port, and you can say, okay, we're migrating our code base, we're going to put new files over in X folder and old files in Y folder, and if there is a file in X, then run it there. If it's in Y, then run it there, and send one to the HHVM and one to PHP. Wouldn't recommend it, but it's possible. So this is what the Nginx config looks like. So I have a server block, server name underscore, because I want everything to run on this. And this is literally, it's identical to regular PHP. Basically, here we have fast pass to the HHVM sock instead of the PHP FPN sock. That's the only difference here. So that's great. HHVM itself does need to be set up, just like PHP FPM does. So it's a very simple INI type file. Tell it where to put the socket, tell it that it is fast CGI. There is an event-based built-in server that they used to use before they had fast CGI. That is deprecated. So fast CGI is the way to run this. Our source root, so your document root, and then things like logs and whatnot. And then you just run HHVM-m daemon, put it in the background, -c, the location of this file, and who to run it as. So here, www data. Another huge thing that's come out just in recent months is long-term support. So they do a release every 6 weeks. Okay, and that's kind of hard to keep pace with. I mean, we see most people are still using PHP 5.3 at best, right? So we know that like getting people to upgrade is hard, but if you're using HHVM, you're probably okay with bleeding edge, but still, long-term support is a big, big deal. So basically what this looks like, version 3.3, which was the most recent release, was supposed to be on the 11th, but actually came out on the 19th of September, is now supported all the way until the 13th of August 2015. So they support it for 4 8-week release cycles, I believe it is. So as you can see, if you run the LTSs, you're actually only going to be upgrading once every just less than a year. I think it's like 10 months. That's probably the way to go at this point, and 3.3 is pretty awesome. All right, that's HHVM. It's just a server, it's not that fancy. So Hack, it's not a new language. It's important to understand that it runs through the exact same runtime as in HHVM as PHP does, but because of things like type hinting, the static analysis can work a lot better, and the JIT can work a lot better to improve the performance of that code. So it is strongly typed when you write it, but it has type erasure. When you actually run it, it doesn't care anymore, only for the purpose of performance increases with the JIT. It has super, super fast static analysis. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest problem that they had with HPHPC was the impact on the developer workflow. And part of Hack and part of HHVM is making sure that doesn't happen. The way they did that is their static, or one of the ways they did that is making sure their static analysis is super fast. So on Facebook's 300 million lines of code, it returns in less than a second. Okay, so when you hit save, you've already got your static analysis before you can really even think about it. Okay. So a primary goal of Hack is to not negatively impact the developer's workflow, especially the REPL, read, eval, print loop, right? Whereby we can edit code and refresh our browser to immediately see changes. I actually wrote that, so it's a quote from myself. But that's one of the huge goals of this. So editor support, it basically supports everything, so long as everything is Vim or Emacs. You can run it straight from the command line, and that's what I do because I use PHP Storm. I understand the PHP Storm folks are hoping to maybe work on this, but that's not their primary focus. You can use it as an external tool in PHP Storm or most other editors, but with Vim and Emacs, when you hit that :W to write, it'll automatically spit out the static analysis result. But yeah, I mean, it's a standalone tool on the command lines. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. They just ship with Vim and Emacs support. As I mentioned very briefly earlier, there's no closing tags in Hack. So it means the file semantics in Hack are a little bit different. So you cannot mix Hack with HTML, but there is a way to do HTML in your code that's way, way better. We'll get to that. All Hack files must start with open tag $HH, not PHP. That's how we identify it. That can then be followed by a identifier that says which level of Hack you're going for. No closing tags, and as I mentioned, it has multiple modes. There's an awesome feature called Xhp. I don't know what it stands for, but it doesn't matter. Xhp is also released as a PHP extension. So if you like this feature, you can go and download it from GitHub and compile it straight into your PHP. And what it allows you to do is use XML or XHTML as first-class constructs within your code. So we'll get to that, and it allows things like automatic escaping because it can understand what's a tag and what is C data. So hack modes, this is really important. There are 3 modes. The first one is partial mode. This is the default. So basically this allows for gradual typing. They understand that you're not just going to like magically have a hack code base. So partial mode allows you to put in types where you're writing new code and it will be strictly adhered to by the static analyzer, but not everything must be typed. It also means that you can call into regular PHP code without even converting it to hack, and it will work. It won't give you any kind of error. So just $HH. Strict mode, right, which is my preferred one, but you cannot. It is currently impossible to have a 100% strict code base. All code must be typed, so that's doable. You cannot call into non-hack codes. You cannot call legacy PHP code. So if you're using like anything from Composer, you're not going to be able to call it in strict mode unless it's a hack package. But the one that's tricky is no top-level code. Everything must be encapsulated in a class or in a function. This means you can't have any entry point. So your index.php can't run the Bootstrap because you can't have any top-level stuff. So at the very least, your entry point has to be partial or regular PHP. It doesn't really matter. I happen to know Facebook is still using just a PHP one. It doesn't care. It's like we're not going to get any benefit from moving it to hack. Arrays must be type hinted. In partial, you don't have to type hint them. But you also, there's a whole bunch of collections that have been added to hack, which are better ways of storing collections of data, and those are preferred. So that looks like disk / strict. So everyone kind of goes, oh, you're using a comment to like dictate how your code works. Who cares? Move on. All right, so the next one is declarations mode, also known as decal. Basically, type hints are trusted. So if you say there's a type hint, it will go, okay, sure, but they're not required. And that's just / decal. It is possible to ignore errors. It's highly recommended that you don't. So basically, I'll just show this. You put / capital unsafe around a block, or at the top of a block of code, and it'll run to the end of the block. So if you put it above an if statement, it'll apply to everything in that if down to the next curly bracket. Should be your last resort. So basically, you just can't type hint this for whatever reason. That's what / unsafe. But of course, it may result in runtime errors. So be careful with it. All right. This is the main feature people see in hack because it's the most obvious. It's the biggest syntax change, type hints. You can type hint method arguments, return values, which is really cool. We just kind of, I think the RC got pulled for that in PHP. But they're working on an RC for return values in PHP as well, and class properties. You can use all standard PHP types, so integers, floats, strings, arrays, resources, and class or interface names. You can also use mixed, which is basically any. It's really not recommended. You get no benefit from it, of course, but at least you can type it with it. And then these are all of the collections that are shipped with hack. So vectors, maps, sets, tuples, and pairs. So vectors are numerically contiguously indexed. So basically it's 0 all the way through. You cannot skip a number, okay? And they always have to be numbers. Maps are typed, but you can use both integers and strings as your keys. Sets are completely unindexed. There's no keys, but they all have to be unique. I actually don't know what you would do with that. Tuples, it's a fixed set, so it's like a fixed size array with typed values, and the types are inferred when you create it in the first place. It's kind of cool. And then pairs is just a fixed size 2-value pair. That one I don't really see much use for either. 2 special types, void, which basically says no return value. So when you used to have @return void in your doc block, this is explicit in the code. And then this, which is basically the equivalent of the static keyword in PHP, which is the late static bound $this, okay? It's possible to do nullable types. So basically it allows for nulls to be passed in addition to whatever the type is specified. Now this is not a default. So you can have a required argument, but it just happens to allow nulls. And basically, you prefix the hint with a question mark. So here we have a nullable int, and this is a nullable datetime object. So class DB adapter, public function connect, a nullable string DSN. So you can explicitly put in a null, and it will use the defaults, but you have to put in something. Okay, and of course, it will return a nullable PDO. So maybe we return a null on an error. Okay. You can also do soft types. These will pass the test of being typed as far as the static analyzer is concerned, but they're not enforced. So basically, sorry, where's my, what'd you do with my water?
I think it's locked up.
Oh, it's right here. The primary point of soft types is intended for a migration tool. So you're going from PHP to Hack, and you're not sure necessarily every single code pass. So you can use soft types to say, I'm pretty sure this is an int, but put some boxing around it if you're jitting it and make sure that you check. So that boxing basically says, is it an int? No, it's not. So let's go back through the old interpreted mode. Oh, it is. We can use the fast performance JIT stuff. So soft types are awesome. And basically, it's very similar to the nullable types. You prefix with an at. So at int is a soft int, and at datetime. So I have my class calculator, public function add, at int a, at int b, and at int return, and hopefully everything's an int, but we're not entirely sure. Any questions so far? Okay. You can also do custom types, and this one is actually really cool. So I don't know about you guys, I have never worked in a strongly typed language before. I've used like Python, but like it's kind of easy. This is my first foray into a language that I know really, really well, and I can just apply type hints on top of that. And I was kind of blown away by the ability to remove a bunch of sort of validation logic or cagey logic. Is this thing here? I don't know, because maybe, by using custom types. And it was really cool. So there are two types, ways you can do it. You can do type aliases, which basically says this int, we want to make it look like this thing. So I use HTTP status code as an example. So, and you have opaque types. It's only used for static analysis. At runtime, this stuff is discarded and they use their original types. But it is really cool. So type aliases are created with the type keyword, and opaque types are created with the new type keyword. This is what this would look like. So I have type HTTP status code equals int. So this is an alias. Okay, anywhere that we have a type hint for an int, we can now pass in an HTTP status code, and vice versa. That's important. So class HTTP status, I've created 3 constants of type HTTP status code, OK, found, and not found. I've got their IDs there. I then create this map, which uses HTTP status code as the keys, and string as the value. So this is now a mapping between the error code and the message that I would send in that status. And then here I have public function send. Again, I want a status code, and I send the correct header. Okay. What's a map?
I missed the big first part.
You missed it?
Why not just do int instead of status code?
Oh, why not? Because basically it's documented code. This is for me to know this is what I expect to use. So when I look at the code, I can go, okay, this is expecting an HTTP status code, so I know it's going to be a set, out of this set of values, so the 100, 200, 400 series, right? That's the reason you would use it. When I call it, I can do this. So this is my not found function. So status equals new HTTP status and send to 404. But that's an int. That's not an HTTP status code, right? So what if I passed in 417, which I think is the I'm a T-bot status? Is that going to work? Like, how do I know? Do I know that that exists in my map? What's going on here? So this will run and it's fine, but we're assuming we have this little bit here. If is set, like, we have to check if the status even exists. Do we know about it in our worldview before we can go ahead and send that? So basically, it allows you to give more appropriate names to existing types. That's it. So Unix time for int. Okay, that's fine. Oh, shoot, that's the wrong button. There we go. Opaque types, on the other hand. So opaque types are called opaque types because their implementation is completely hidden from you. Unless you are in the file where that type is defined, it is a completely immutable piece of data. You don't know that it's an int versus a float or whatever. I mean, you might know, but the code is not aware and cannot modify that type. It's not enforced at runtime. You'll notice a lot of this. This is all about the static analysis. It's all about writing good code, not running good code. So here we just changed our type, HTTP status code int, into new type, HTTP status code equals int. And if we tried to pass in 404 here, it would give us an error in the static analyzer. Instead, we have to pass in this typed item right here. So that was our constant from our class before. So what this allows us to do, that if that we had, we can just ignore it. We know that this has been defined somewhere as an HTTP status code, and it's fine to go through. So we just remove a whole bunch of logic. It's great. This is, yes? Shoot. Oh, this is going to squeal. Oh, hey. I'll leave it right here. People can come up and ask questions.
When you're talking about the static analyzer, then you said that it was strip. When you go into like running the code, it's actually strip.
Yes.
So if I just upload my code, it will run the first time.
It will run, correct.
So
the static analyzer is something you're doing during development. So what you want to do is not be checking in code that fails the static analyzer.
I see.
Yeah. So
it will still do it one time if I upload it.
No, it does not. It will analyze it, but it's not the same it uses the static analyzer to inform the JIT process or the runtime process, but it's not for the same purpose of informing you that there are errors. So it doesn't like error out.
So if I check in a code, like if I commit something that's wrong,
yes,
it will still run.
It will still run. It will still run. It's just like PHP will. It will just type coerce. But you have huge potential performance issues. Can I leave that with you? It's off. All right, so this is my favorite feature because it really illustrates the point of Hack, of making your life easier with really simple changes to the language. Constructor argument promotion allows you to take code that looks something like this. Who has not written this piece of code right here? Private left, private right. We've got two arguments, left and right, and then we have to assign them in the constructor, and that's all the constructor does, right? This is so common. Everybody does this. So with constructor argument promotion, we're allowed to get rid of a whole bunch of boilerplate code. I'll wait till you take in your picture. You done? Okay. Basically, by prefixing our arguments with the visibility modifier, so private, protected, or public, it automatically knows that we're going to promote them up to arguments, right? So you notice I don't have my defined properties here, and I don't have, there's the end of the function right there, I don't have the assignments at all. Hack will just do it for you, right? It's documented right here. It means you can get rid of a whole bunch of boilerplate. This guy over here is like, I don't know about this. I promise you this is a lot more succinct and a lot more easy than putting it in your code. What's nice about this is that you don't have to remember to define that property at the top. It's automatically done for you. You look at the constructor, you know exactly where things are going when you pass them in and what visibility they're going to have, and it's just a lot simpler and a lot less characters. All right, collections. This is a huge part of Hack. Arrays are the workhorse of PHP. I have another talk on internals, and I say that PHP would be really shit without variables, but equally so without arrays. But unfortunately in PHP, or fortunately because I love it, arrays are kind of very generic, and there's a lot of performance that we lose out on because arrays allow you to use them in multiple ways, and it can't make performance adjustments for that. So for example, there's an SPL fixed array, which allows you to have a fixed length array, which gives you performance benefits because it's not having to manage memory and stuff on the overhead. Hack goes a little further than that and provides a whole bunch of collections, which are actually really closer to SPL's array object type stuff. So they're all objects. They provide an object-oriented interface, and they work like arrays because they implement the array access interface, right? But because they're built into Hack and they are part of the language, they can put a whole bunch of performance behind them. It would almost be possible to write these in PHP. So we have arrays. They're still around in Hack. Mentioned earlier, if you're in strict mode, they must be typed, both keys and values. We have tuples. That's okay. We have tuples, which are typed arrays. Pairs, which can only contain 2 pieces of data. Vectors, which, as I mentioned, numerically consecutively keyed only. Maps, which are ordered dictionaries that allow ints or strings, but not both. Sets, which are unordered collections of unique values. And again, I'm not so sure about that one. And there are also immutable variants of all of those, which is really cool.
I can use some of those like an enum if I wanted to.
Yes, so you could use an immutable variant as an enum. Arrays are in partial mode untyped. To type them, we use this. So array with the HTML brackets and the type, that will type the values with integer keys. So you can specify one type, or you can specify both the key and the value by just passing in both. So this is what this looks like. So function array, create array, I'm going to return an array of ints. And there we have return array 1, 2, 3, right? Very simple. Tuples. So they're internally actually identical to arrays. The implementation is an array, but they are a fixed size, so they're like a fixed array. There's 2 ways to define them. One is to implicitly type hint them by actually defining it just like an array. So if we go back to here, this would implicitly say these are all ints, so therefore I can only store ints. Very simple. Or you can use the literal syntax. So what this looks like, and you must use the literal syntax when you're doing return types. So foo equals tuple 1, 2, 3. Okay. Literally just change the word array to tuple. That's all we have to do there. So it'll be int string, because that's what we passed in. Down here, I'm returning a tuple, so I need to use the literal syntax, which is just the parentheses with the types, so int string. Okay. Very simple. Pairs, as I mentioned, 2 values. They are immutable. This is the only one that doesn't have a non-immutable variation. Contains 2 values. They are keyed as 0 and 1. You do not get a choice in that. This uses a different literal syntax where you have the name and then the curly brackets, which is mostly the same for all of them except for tuples. And this is the only thing that I could think of to do an example of around pairs, which is this key value get task type doohickey. So that's what a pair is. Now, interestingly, vectors, which are coming up next, the only way that you can append a value to the end is by passing in a pair, and the first one is the key and the second one is a value. That's something I hope they're going to change. I think they will, but we'll see. So vectors can only use integer keys. Look like this. So when we return type int it, vector, square brackets, and whatever the values are typed as, which means everything must have the same type. And then return vectored, strings, right? Again, with this literal syntax of the name of the collection and the curly brackets, which I really hope means they're going to have literal objects at some point in Hack. We'll see. Maps. These are probably the closest thing to PHP arrays without being PHP arrays. So they can have integer or string keys, whereas PHP arrays, of course, can have mixed. And everything in them must be of the same type, which is the only other difference. So you must specify both key type and the value type when you define them. And that looks a little bit something like this, again with the angle brackets, so map, string, string, and we return the map, curly bracket, literal syntax, and we're passing strings in. Sets, unordered collections with no keys, they must be unique values. So we return a set of tags, again literal syntax, it's pretty simple. For the immutable stuff, basically you just prefix the name of the class with IMM, standing for immutable. So in this example, we have an immap, and now we can no longer change it. And if you try to do that, like I'm doing here, so map HHVM equals HHVM, it will give you this wonderful error from the static analyzer, which says you cannot mutate this. This is an object of type immap. As I mentioned earlier, appending elements, only vectors, this is where, sorry, I went wrong on this, only vectors allow the empty square bracket syntax like normal arrays. Pairs and tuples do not allow adding additional elements, they're fixed size. So maps allow you to append only through pairs, so we'll look at that. So function append to map returns a void, $m equals, this is our map, 0 foo, 1 bar. We want to append a pair. Now we're still using the square syntax here, but we have to pass in a pair which defines both the key and the value. A little bit janky, I'm not too keen on that, but it is what it is. So if we've already done that, obviously we would see 0, 1, and 5 would be bad. Yes? There's right here on the front. You want to switch it on.
Does that mean there's no modification of elements of a map, that there's only removal and re-add?
You can modify the elements in it. So if you have an immutable item, if it has a sub collection, you can modify those. That's something to be aware of. It does not freeze the entire thing. It is only the top level. Yes. For this particular one? Yes, the pair is just used as the data structure to pass in the information. It's not actually stored. Right, sorry. Yeah, so the pair just is for defining the key and the value. It is not put into the map. As I mentioned, they are, for the most part, they're actually classes. So they have a full object-oriented interface. It's based on the SPL. Right? They want to have minimal impact on your workflow. So what do they use? Is something you're familiar with, SPL. So it allows for adding, removing, and manipulation, and it allows you to use them as objects rather than just as better arrays, which is kind of cool. But because of this, they have this weird issue with iteration. When you iterate an array in PHP, it actually creates a copy. What that means is that you can modify stuff without it breaking the original away and getting you into this weird infinite loop. Okay, so you can modify the original without getting into an infinite loop. Because these are objects, they don't have that protection. They could be anything. You could extend them to whatever you want with them. So what will happen is if you try to do that, it'll actually throw an exception. So fatal error, uncaught exception, invalid operation exception with message collection was modified during iteration, and it'll bail out of the loop. So what that means is that you need to create a new structure within that loop rather than modifying the original one. Another cool feature, sort of similar to the collection stuff, is shapes. So it's basically tuples but with predefined structures, not predefined keys or value types, but actual structures to them. So they can be used as a form of validation, and this is what I found was to be really, really cool. So it ensures integrity of this larger data structure. Like you can say this is an int because it's typed as an int, we know it's an int, we know it's absolutely an int. But what do you do with sort of these larger array structures that we have in PHP? How do you type int those and have integrity to them? And shapes is the answer to that. So we're going to use a shape here, and we're going to define an HTTP request. So new type, so it's opaque, HTTP request, shape. We have a status, which is an HTTP status code. That's from earlier. Headers must be a map, string, so we're going to be key value pairs. So, except colon would be the left side, and right would be text/HTML, whatever. And then we have our data. So this is another shape. And inside here, we're going to have get, post, cookie, and server. And because typically you're only going to get one of the get, post, and cookie, or potentially no cookies, right? You're only going to get one of get or post. These are nullables. And because the right-hand side, we don't know necessarily what we're going to get. It should be strings because it's PHP-like, but maybe you're doing some other weird stuff with your request. So we're doing string and mixed. So the left side is the name of the key. So, get, login, whatever, and mixed is the value. And then we have a body, which is just the nullable string. So if you're doing a put or a post or something like that, that's where that would end up. What's cool about that is that you no longer need to be checking that structure for information. Like, you don't need to be checking that structure for structure. You know what's in it and what exists just based on the type. Anonymous functions. We have them in PHP. If you saw my talk yesterday, they were added in 5.3. Closures are awesome, except for one little fact. One, they're kind of verbose, and two, they don't inherit scope. So what Hack did is said, well, we usually want the scope, and we end up passing everything in, so why are we doing this? So they added anonymous functions, so not closures. They're way, way more concise. So this is what their closures, or their anonymous functions look like, is this double equals arrow. So the left-hand side is the arguments, and the right-hand side is the expression that's going to be run inside of that anonymous function. And obviously it gets assigned to fn. If you want multiple expressions or you want multiple arguments, so multiple arguments you use parentheses, and expressions you just put inside the regular curly braces. Okay. So we're going to start to see a little bit of
yes. Ignore args if it's just the no parameters passed in.
I don't know the answer to that. I've never seen it. It's a really, if nobody heard the question, what if I don't have any arguments? And I honestly don't know the answer to that. So I'm going to look that up and modify this slide. So list equals UL. So this is part of Xhp, which we'll get to. Array walk over our items, and then we have this little anonymous function. So item is the argument, and list append child, because the list is a structure, collection. And we're going to append this list item, very simple. And then echo the list. So we'll get to that. All right, Xhp. This is actually really cool. Like, this is a feature I was like, but the more I think about it and the more I see it and the more I use it, Xhp gets better and better and better. So it makes XML syntax a top-level syntax. So just like, say, echo is, you can now use XML tags without any string quotes, right? They are top-level elements. They're no longer strings. That's really important. They auto-escape any C data, and they allow for object-oriented semantics. So you can do composable widgets for like templating, which is really cool. So you can have one tag that is composed of multiple tags and have widgets. And you'll see a use for that. You'll see that actually they've done that already. It must be XML. So you need to use short tags. So if you've got BR, you need to have that closing slash. Okay, it's important. So this is what it looks like. So echo P hello world, no quotes, right? Looks a little odd. You're like, oh, what the hell? That PHP would probably error, but like if not, it would like be undefined constant, assuming the string, right? That's best case. But in this case, this P actually references a class on the back end that accepts strings as part of its body and knows to escape them. So as I mentioned, it's fully object-oriented. It's very similar to the DOM, again, trying to make sure that your workflow isn't impacted. Classes are defined by prefixing them with a colon, which looks really weird, but it allows you to differentiate. And this is exactly how the Xhp extension for PHP works as well. So basically, all elements extend this $x element base class, which has this DOM-like interface to it. So append child, prepend child, replace children, get children, first child, attributes is attribute, whatever, right? All of this is, if you know DOM, this is fairly similar. So let's look at why this is better. Echo UL, this is PHP, right? For each items is item, echo the list item. HTML entities, you got to deal with the quotes and character sets. Echo out that, close the list item, and then close the UL. That goes down to this little thing right here. So because it's XML, as soon as you put a child in, it automatically expands to have that closing tag, right? And because we're using Xhp, we don't need to do any escaping. It's automatically done for us. So we just use the curly bracket syntax right here to have the text go in right there. And we use the append child from the interface. You taking another picture? Or tweeting? I don't know. One thing that they've done, they released it, I think, like 2 weeks ago, is Xhp Bootstrap. So they've created a bunch of Xhp elements which are widgets from Bootstrap, and they cover all of the Bootstrap type widgets. So this thing here is a Bootstrap dropdown, which has buttons in it and has a menu in it. And if you run this, you get a little drop down, right? That's kind of cool. Why does this matter? Like, why do you want all of this extra syntax? 2 reasons. One is that auto-escaping and validation. So if you were to, for example, go back here. If you have a class attribute on here, you can specify what a valid class is. And if you don't pass a valid class and say you make a typo, it knows and it will bitch at you, which is great. Not only that, but if you use an invalid tag, then you also get an error. Okay? It also gives you more semantic markup on the back end. Of course, it's still generating divs and whatnot on the front end, but as a developer, you can look at this tag and go, oh, okay, it's a drop down. Gives you encapsulation. As I mentioned before, you can use object-oriented semantics of hierarchy, and you can build widgets and build very complex parts of your templating into very small, discrete tags. And then finally, it's future-proof. So if you've ever used Bootstrap, they make a fair amount of changes. So if they go ahead and change this markup entirely, the implementation doesn't matter to you. All you need to know is your own tags, and you can map it out in your underlying implementation. Any questions on that? You have the mic. Shame on you.
So when you use the Bootstrap, does it load the JavaScript CSS?
It does not. You still have to, there are tags to do that very simply, but it will not automatically pull in Bootstrap.
So it's just CSS style?
It's just
hard-coded
the,
CSS
it's just the
style.
markup.
Just the markup.
Just the markup.
Okay.
So.
I then assign that to a variable and have included back into stuff and do blocks, as it were.
Yes, so you would use the append child type stuff, and it would. So basically, what happens when you do the echo, it kind of does a toString and goes through the type of tag it is and looks through everything and makes sure that you're using the correct attributes and values and all that sort of stuff. Yes, yes, exactly that. And in fact, you'll see that. So here, there's a print right at the top. I know it's very small. Yes, so I'm doing that here. Yeah, so UL and then using the append child. All right, so command line tools. Sorry, here we go. There's a whole bunch of command line tools that come with Hack and HHVM. The static analyzer is the #1 tool, and it's the one you're probably going to use the most because it's running all the time. There's two parts to it. There's HHserver. HHserver is the actual static analysis tool, and what it does is it sits there running in the background, uses iNotify to see if you've made any changes, and as soon as it sees a change, it runs and does a static analysis. But it doesn't show you anything. It just runs it and stores it. By default, it will analyze both PHP files and .hh files, but only if they have that HH open tag. So it will not give you analysis on PHP code. The second part is HH client. Now this is what you're going to use to actually look at those results. What's cool about this is it will start HHserver automatically if necessary. It retrieves the results of that static analysis that have already happened, or obviously it initiates it if it just started the server, and it displays them in the CLI, or it integrates with Vim and Emacs. Has a JSON output as well, so I actually tried to hack it into PHP Storm by using, they have PHP code sniffer support. So I was like, well, if I can output JSON, I can really easily parse that and transform that into the PHP code sniffer output, and hopefully it would be able to read it. But PHP Storm just blew up when I put the HH tag in, and it wouldn't work on the parse side without it. So that's a shame. But that's how the static analysis looks. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Yes?
One quick question. Do they have anything other than iNotify?
No.
No Windows sign-up.
No. They're working on it. Okay, so as far as support, it used to be as recently as 3 months ago, HHVM would run on anything so long as anything was 64-bit Linux. Okay, they are working. They have Liz Smith working super hard on getting it working on Windows. They're almost there, and Mac works, but the JIT does not work. So that's where they're at there. But yes, I run this natively on my Mac. Not on this one. I just got a new one, but. Yeah, so they are definitely expanding. They're not going to go beyond 64-bit Linux, but they do want Windows, they do want Mac. And again, it's that whole work with the developer. That's where people are working. That's what they need. It does install, the easiest way to do it, what I do is I have a Vagrant with Debian, actually Ubuntu 14 something running on it. And there's a nightly package and there's a stable package. It's just apt-get install. It's super easy. All right, so let's take a look at the static analyzer because this is like the coolest part of Hack. So this is a strict file. We have a function greeting, has a strict $who and returns a void, right? Sorry, string $who, returns a void. But we're actually returning a string here, right? So we know that's an error. And then we're going to call it, so echo greeting, and we're going to pass in an integer. So we got two mistakes here. When we run this through the static analyzer, we get this. I don't know how well you can see this. So basically it says here on line 6, was expecting a return type hint. So we didn't hint here at all. This is a strict file. We must have a return type hint. On line 7, which is this line right here, it says that we have an invalid argument. And then you'll notice, maybe, it's indented very slightly so that you can actually see that these three errors are actually together. So it's an invalid argument error, and it says on line 2, right here, this is defined as a string, and it is incompatible with a float on line 7, which is where we're passing in the 1.0, right? So it's really concise and very particular in telling you exactly what is wrong. So, yes?
I was going to cast that 1.0 string, just put a string in front of it like I
Yes, you can do casting. Be kind of dumb, but yes. Yeah, no, it's totally doable. The last one we get is that you cannot return a value because we have this return type of void on line 3, and then this is a void function, so just a little bit more information. Sorry, line 3 will return a string because this is a void defined as void. I forgot to start my timer on this thing, so I have no idea where I'm at. that slide. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Got a little bit more. This is what the Vim integration looks like. Again, it's dark on. Doesn't work. But basically, when you hit that :W, pops up the second pane, and the exact same errors come in. If you do have set mouse equals A, is the only way I know how to do it. We have mouse support. You can actually double-click on these and go straight to that line in that file. Bear in mind, this is for the entire code base, not the file that you are in. That's actually important because if you make a change in something that's included, it may be casting a type differently and used elsewhere in the wrong context. So you do want it to be every single file. I have other validation stuff that runs like PHP lint and stuff, and whatever that plugin is, this also is using the same quick fix list thing. All right, so that's the static analysis. It's really cool. Go play with it. Refactoring. This is an incomplete tool, but it is there. It's part of HH's client, and basically it allows you to rename classes, functions, or methods, but it doesn't support namespaces. So it's of limited use right now, but they'll fix that. It's there. The benefit of it is through the use of static analysis, you can be pretty damn confident that the refactoring worked correctly. Not 100%, you should always check, but, and this is what this looks like. So HH client check, -- refactor. Big warning there. It says, what would you like to refactor? So 1 will be a class, 2 will be a function, 3 will be a method. If you pass in 2, like I've done here, it'll ask you for the function name, ask you for the new name, and then it will tell you how many files it had to rewrite. Okay. So of limited use right now, but know that they're working on it and it is coming. This is where things get really cool. So, hackificating. Facebook has this wonderful graph of them running this on different sections of their code base and going from like 1% of hack to 20% of hack to now I think they're up to 80-something% of hack versus PHP. So hackificating is the term used for converting from PHP to hack code, right? They know this is something that we're going to want to do, and they've created a really fantastic workflow for this. So the first thing that we do is we change the opening tag. That's the simplest thing we can do. So we go from $PHP to $HH. Then you can add soft type hints. I mentioned those earlier with the @ signs behind them. You run the code in production, and you gather the logs. Or even better, you run your 100% code coverage test unit suite, because everyone has those, right? And you gather the logs, right? You can then take those log files and you can feed them back into this or into a slightly different tool, and it'll strip out any type hints that it got wrong. Okay, so it uses static analysis to add soft types based on what it thinks should be there, and then based on the logs, it removes any that were wrong. Okay, because you don't want to accidentally say this should be an int when it really shouldn't. And then the last thing that you do is you harden those type hints. So the ones that are correct are valid, you then harden them and remove all those @ symbols. There's another tool for that. So what does this look like? So the first tool is the hackificator. That's kind of where this thing comes from. And literally all it does is change that $HH to $PHP to $HH. It's not a great tool. So hackificator dot will just go ahead and change every single PHP file to $HH. The second tool is adding soft type hints. So this is part of HH server. So as I said, it uses static analysis to figure out what those hints should be. So here we've got HH server convert. This is the source. This is the output. So I've done the same directory, so it'll do it in place. If you're running version control, that's fairly safe, right? And a branch, please. Public static function make barcode. So this is from the Zend image barcode class. It takes 2 arguments, barcode and barcode config equals array. So from this, it can infer, there's also like the body of it, of course, that returns stuff. It can infer that barcode is probably a string, but there may be some checks in there for is null or something like that, so it makes it a nullable string. We definitely know, or pretty confidently know, that barcode config should be an array, because we've already typed, or sort of got a default in there. So @array, and then because we do have a return somewhere inside the body of that function, it's also got a soft type hint on the return. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that it'll do. Yes?
Davey, I've noted, is it good enough? Can you hear me? Is hack code faster than regular PHP code?
Yes. So because of all the type hints, the JIT can make much better assumptions for optimizing your code. So I mentioned earlier, if you're running PHP stuff through HHVM, what it'll do is it will look at your code through multiple passes and go, okay, this has always been an int, therefore it should always be an int, and we can optimize on that.
So
but because it's PHP code, We're not 100% sure. So what we're going to do is say, if it is an int, then go ahead and run that JITted code. Otherwise, we have to run it through the interpretive mode, and let's reevaluate that assumption. Sorry.
Would it make sense to have that as sort of post-commit hook, or put that in your continuous integration?
That can do this?
Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't.
Would it make sense?
Yeah, I don't think so. It would be nice if it could do it and throw it in another branch or something, but like you have to review this when it's done. So the next thing that you do, as I said, is you run it in production. Or wherever, and you verify those type hints just by running it. So you capture the HHVM log file. You go ahead and remove those invalid soft type hints. So you feed the log file back into this hack remove soft type hints tool. So hack remove soft type hints, delete from log, pass in the log file. It's really dumb. The paths have to be the same. So if your production environment is ever so slightly different, use something like sed to modify those files to make them the same as your local, and it'll work. So as I said, what this will do is remove any incorrect soft type hints. So they will be untyped. Okay, so it cannot be strict, but at least it's not wrong, and it knows to use interpretive mode for those things. Then you want to harden the types. So hack remove soft types -- harden the file name. What that will do will remove all those symbols that you had in there that said they were soft. Now you have correct hard type. And now you converted a huge chunk of your code base without kind of screwing up your production or having multiple errors and stuff. You're very, very confident at this point through this automated process that you've got good type hints. And it's just a way to get you started. It will improve your performance to a certain extent, and just hopefully save you a whole bunch of effort. If you want to run it over all the files in the directory, there's this nice little one-liner here. I have a blog post with this in it, which you can go look at. I'm actually going to flip to that slide first. So I've got a bunch of resources. The number one resource, just like PHP, is the Hacklang website for the manual. HHVM is at hhvm.com. And then I've got a blog series on this. It's 5 different posts which cover everything in here in great detail, called Building a Better PHP. Number 1 is this one here, but if you scan this barcode or go to ey.io/HHVM Hack, then there's a list of those links right in there. And that is all that I have. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, I'll wait. Please go to Joined In. D Shafik on Twitter, davey@engineer.com, and the slides will be up at daveyshafik.com/slides. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, over here. You come here and grab the mic.
So just the hack, I guess, is the LTS combined, like LTS for HHVM and then the support for hack?
Yeah, so hack is within HHVM, so yes, it would be combined. Any other questions? Yes.
One anonymous with no functions, open close parentheses.
Oh, okay, so if you don't have any arguments for your anonymous function, just the parentheses with nothing in them. Thank you. Anyone else? Almost.
I was looking at your example of the HHVM configuration. Is
Yes.
the JIT setting now turned on by default?
Is the which setting?
The JIT?
It is for Linux, but the repo authoritative mode is not. Okay, that will always be off by default. So JITting, it's not something that happens every single request. It does sit there and check for hot pass and stuff like that. So yeah, they have it on by default. Anyone else? Out in the middle here?
Which feature from HHVM do you expect to come into PHP Core?
Which features from Hack do I expect to come to PHP Core? Yeah, so I'm not an internals person, except that I follow it and I'm kind of a fan of it, and I talk to a lot of the people. Return types is already making a showing. Generators started in Hack. I don't know. I would really love to see, I think that the 3 modes that they've got in Hack are a great compromise for the type hinting debate. In PHP, it's kind of all or nothing. It's either you have them and they're hard, or you don't have them and they're soft and they coerce, or whatever. Like, there is no modes type thing, and they don't want a mode system. But I really do think that that is a really good compromise, and it works really, really well. Other features, I really want constructor arg promotion. I said it's my favorite feature. It just saves a ton of boilerplate stuff. It just looks obvious to me. I don't know. I mean, there's still more features going into Hack. It's not a finished language. So other stuff that comes along, I don't know. I do know that the Facebook team do have an eye towards internals. The stuff that they are creating, they would love to see it get into internals where it makes sense. So the decisions that they're making, they are involving internals folks in those decisions for Hack. Right? Before they even think about proposals, like, hey, we have an idea. What might this look like in PHP? Because we want to be very similar. This is part of the reason that they've put a lot of time and effort and money into the PHP spec, because they want to be able to say that, like, we know the PHP way because now it's specified. What does this look like? And they can actually now respond with RFCs with spec and say, this is what it will look like categorically in PHP, and we know that we are compatible because this is spec. Okay, so the answer is I don't know, but I would love to see a lot of them. Hints, though, probably not going to happen.
Yeah, it looks like it's not happening.
Yeah, return. I think return hints will. Return type.
I don't think parameter.
Yeah, parameter type hints won't. So yes.
One thing you mentioned casually, I didn't see a slide about, what are they doing with annotations?
With that's a whole nother thing. So annotations, they do have annotation support, which basically means that you can, again, using comments, well, kind of comments. In PHP there would be comments, but there's a special type of comment that allows you to add more information to your code without actually writing the logic around it. One of the most important ones they've added is for, they had no way to type hint the static instance creation stuff. They didn't know what was being returned because you could do overrides and stuff like that. So they do have a type hint that says this one is safe. So they have an annotation for this one is safe. I haven't really looked at the annotation stuff because I've not really done any AOP aspect-oriented type programming where they're typically, I see them used. But definitely do go look at them, yes.
The main thing about annotation is that you are very accessible to perfection. Well, that's saying, like, are they like Java or first-class citizens?
They are in Hack. They are first-class citizens.
They're not just reflection-based things. Well, they have to know what, oh, yeah, you can have a type of unsafe valuations. It's not that that goes in on the main annotation happen. Like, for example, you have an override annotation that if you add it and your function is not actually overriding another, the static value of the type will go in error. This is really not a trade.
So annotations in PHP, as we have them right now, are just doc block comments, right? And they have to be parsed, right? So while there's a great API for getting those doc block comments through SPL, you have to parse them and make all the inferences from them yourself. With the annotations that they are in Hack, it's still you need to go through an API to get to them, but they are discrete elements. They're not being parsed out of a larger string. They are just something that's in there. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Clap.